I want to come clean. I haven't been totally honest with either you or myself. If you know me and you're familiar with the channel, you'll know I started out creating videos on the CFA and specifically how you can smash the charter, which generally went very well. But over time, I started to wonder, why do people actually do the CFA? And it's ultimately as a stepping stone or a tool for breaking into finance. And since I work in finance and specifically investment banking, I thought it made sense to make content on how to break into the industry. But for that, I had to reposition the channel. So I started to look into the YouTube game. What content do people want to see? What title and thumbnails work? When should you post your videos? And ultimately, I started to get too technical and focus on what sells and lost sight of the actual value I want to share. And this internally caused misalignment and a lack of motivation because it's not why I started this channel. And it made me think, why am I where I am today? Yes, there's been times where I've had to do things that I don't want to do. That's generally life. But overall, it's always been clear why I'm doing it. It's always contributed to a greater goal or for the greater good of my life and others. It's much easier to push through when something internally feels right. So I'm going to hit the reset button, and from here on, my content is going to be totally raw and authentic, even if it doesn't sell, because I've realized you can only achieve what's meant for you in life if you lean into who you truly are. So in this video, I'm going to share the real truth about what it's like to work in finance, including why I chose to work in finance, what the early years were like, what it's really like to work in investment banking, and my take on whether it's as glamorous as it seems, including whether the pay is as good as it seems. So let's start with why I chose to work in finance. And contrary to what you might think, I actually never planned to work in finance. I grew up in a small town in England, humble origins. My dad was a store manager, my mum was a teacher, and honestly, I had no idea what finance actually was. I actually wanted to be a doctor, not because I wanted to be one, but because my dad wanted me to be one, which is pretty common in Asian culture. So I actually did apply for medicine at university, but it didn't go well because my head wasn't in the game. I really didn't want it as much as the other candidates wanted it, and ultimately I hated the process. So I ended up taking a gap year and took stock. If I wasn't going to apply for medicine, what shall I apply for? And honestly, I was completely lost. So I reflected on what I was interested in and figured chemistry was a good option. And that was primarily because I had an amazing teacher. So I also did well in the subject and figured I don't know what else to do anyway, so let me pick chemistry. This disappointed my family, particularly at the time. They're much happier with me now, but I remember trying to convince my dad that there were other ways to make money in this world other than medicine. And my primary inspiration actually came from Wolf of Wall Street, which is probably the case for many people. I remember seeing that he was bringing in like $70,000 a month, and I used that example to my dad, who obviously just laughed at me. But that's kind of where I initially learned that there were other ways to make money in this world. And having done a bit of research online, I understood that you could do pretty much any degree and break into finance. Although most people still did a finance degree, accounting, business, etc., it was possible to transition through science, so I went for it. And I landed an offer at Imperial College London, which I knew to be one of the top 10 universities in the world, but I had no idea what to expect. And when I actually landed there, I got the biggest shock of my life because I realized that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. And even though I liked bits of the degree, in general, I lacked discipline badly. And overall, university was pretty much hell. So while everyone else was planning for their future, I was so lost. And I literally just about got through university. I got the grades that I needed to, but I had no plan and I was thrown into the real world. And I had absolutely no chance of landing the top programs. I was competing against people with a clear plan, private schooling, internships, family connections, etc. So I decided to apply for whatever I could land, literally everything: finance, banking, consulting, commercial programs, at pretty much anywhere, and I would take anything. And I got tons of rejections along the way because I literally didn't know what I was doing, and I was largely starting from zero because I had been preparing in advance. And throughout this period, some of my friends started to get jobs and they were earning money, and I was just sitting on the sidelines hoping for a lucky break, and genuinely it was demoralizing. I had no cash. But I remember through this period, I read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules of Life alongside a few other books, and I slowly started to improve my discipline, to learn from my mistakes, and generally get a bit further in these applications. Eventually, after literally 50 plus applications, I landed a role in corporate banking at Lloyds Bank in the UK, plus one or two other roles which were generally non-finance roles. So I went for it, and now we can discuss what the early years in banking were like. So I was actually on a rotational program, which meant I would spend 6 months in 4 roles across a period of 2 years, and at the end of each placement or each role, you would then have to network and apply for the next role. Now, I started in corporate banking, focusing on asset management, and honestly, it was horrible. It was so admin heavy, the work was boring, and I generally hated my life. So I knew that corporate banking and coverage in general was not for me. And as I said, you have to network and apply for the next role. So I started to think about what would interest me. And given I'd just done a chemistry degree, I thought something leaning into energy could be interesting. So I targeted project finance, where essentially you work on financing large infrastructure or energy projects. So that can include things like solar farms, wind farms, etc. So that's what I applied for. But I thought my next placement had to be risk, which would have been supporting the front office project finance investment banking team. So I applied for the risk team, but for whatever reason, I got fortunate and my application actually landed on the front office investment banking team's desk and I got the role. And this was a huge stroke of luck because that front office project finance team is super competitive and highly desirable, and so many people apply for it. But somehow my application landed on their desk, and my profile, having done chemistry and my interest in energy, meant that I actually got the role, and this changed everything for me. My work totally changed. I was now working on financing projects such as wind farms, solar farms, new highways, new schools, etc., etc. So infrastructure and project finance on the whole. And one of the things that I massively developed here was my financial modeling skills. And financial modeling is a crucial skill set in investment banking. And once I had this, it made applying for roles thereafter much easier. So next up, I went to leverage finance risk, where essentially I was looking at the leverage buyouts of companies by private equity firms. And that was kind of the precursor to me ultimately ending up in leverage finance front office investment banking. And overall, I had so much more credibility now. And this initially started with a stroke of luck, but then I took the opportunity with super hard work and developed my skill set and credibility, and that helped open doors for me along the way. And talking of luck, in my first placement within coverage, I actually had an amazing colleague who ultimately became a friend, and he pushed me to start CFA as soon as possible and showed me the ropes. And that ultimately meant I started CFA level 1 before pretty much all my peers during my first placement when I had more time. And then I added project finance plus modeling, and ultimately as a collective, it meant that I was able to apply for front office IB, i.e. Lev Fin, which essentially changed my life. And this is all despite not knowing what leverage finance was just 1 year ago. So now I'd gone from having no idea what to do at university and for that period after university to landing a role, to then having a stroke of luck, to working super hard, to upskilling on modeling, getting CFA level 1 under my belt, landing a role in front office leverage finance. And now, as I said, everything was different and I had so much more clarity and I had the drive and the desire to work hard. And the next thing that happened to me was I got addicted to learning. I was always smart-ish, but I generally struggled to stay focused and learn things that I considered to be useless. So things like English and French and geography at school, no hate on those subjects, I just personally couldn't connect with them. But now, suddenly I was studying finance and asset classes and markets, and all of this was relevant to my day job, plus it helped me improve my personal finances. And this also led to direct reward. It made me better at my job, it opened up new opportunities, it allowed me to earn more, so it was so much easier to motivate myself, and this was an addictive feeling. And this was an inflection point in my life. I realized it's much easier to work hard when you're truly interested in something. So over time, I started to focus on dedicating my time to things that interested me. And I saw it was possible to excel and outcompete your peers by working hard in the shadows. And I actually started to find some enjoyment in sacrificing my evenings and weekends whilst others were out partying and so on. Because I wanted to show people that this was not impossible. I found it addictive. I wanted to prove people wrong and prove to myself that I could do it. And I don't think this is a healthy mentality in the long run. But in the short term, this can be a powerful motivating force. Now let's discuss what it's been like working in investment banking. And at the beginning, honestly, all I can say was I felt privileged. I didn't even know this world existed just a few weeks, months, and years ago. And now I was working on multi-million, if not multi-billion-dollar deals. And it was bloody hard. I had so much to learn and I was surrounded by talented and driven analysts and associates, and it was a constant battle. But I enjoyed it. I was now analyzing businesses that I buy from, I was building models, I was presenting deals, and all of this felt like real work. And along the way, I realized to excel in anything, you generally need to enjoy more than 50% of it. This is my general rule of thumb. If I don't enjoy at least 50%, I try and stop doing something. But this is also the reason that I was able to continue doing both investment banking plus CFA over 3 years, even though they're both super grueling, because generally I enjoyed more than 50% of both of them. Now, there are aspects of investment banking that are not fun. And the first one is you don't always find the business that you're working on interesting, but you always need to do the same level of due diligence and work for every single deal. One of my least favorite industries is insurance businesses, and they're also very complex. And so I often have to do deals for insurance businesses and go deep into the due diligence. And sometimes this is at 11, 12 p.m. at night, and you're sort of hating your life, but you have to do it. So you always have to push through regardless of how you feel. And generally, it's bloody hard work and it's relentless. One deal completes or dies, the next one crops up. You got to start again. And if a deal dies, you don't have time to be demoralized, even if you spent weeks building that model, writing those papers, etc. You don't have time to stop. It is relentless. It often spills late into the night, weekends, you have to give up plans. And sometimes you do ask, why am I doing this? Then there's the politics. Now, my team is actually pretty nice, especially given it's an investment banking team. But overall, people in finance are more direct and less tolerant. They're busy, they're stressed, and you often don't have a lot of time to make a good impression. And if they get a bad impression of you, it can be hard to make that up. And also, it's a very competitive workplace. And this can make you doubt yourself, especially whilst you're junior. You're second guessing yourself on whether you're adding any value or contributing. You're not sure if the team likes you. It's hard to assert yourself and so on and so forth. Now, this does get better with time, but at the beginning, this is a big challenge. Now, I'll do a separate video on this, but what I would say is generally, if you work super hard, you're aware of your weaknesses and you work on them, you're reliable and trustworthy and you help other people, things will get easier for you. But along the way, you have to reposition from sort of finding your feet to actively selling yourself. And this is where you do begin to grow in confidence and understand your value proposition. But something that you kind of have to learn is that the workplace is not entirely a meritocracy. Like, you think if you work hard and you contribute, that people will recognize that and they'll reward you for that. But that's not how it works. You have to learn to sell yourself. The art of humble bragging, relationship building, letting people know what you work on, tracking your progress, all of these things come in. And only if you do this well and express this well, will you progress at a decent pace. Sometimes you get left behind simply because you don't shout about what you've achieved. Now, as I said, I'll do another video on the sort of political piece and selling yourself. And I appreciate that wasn't perfectly structured in homage to my new raw and authentic approach. But I just wanted to share my thoughts there on the political landscape and how you sort of navigate that. Now, one of the big ones is investment banking as glamorous as it seems. And as I mentioned earlier, one of my initial inspirations for breaking into this industry was Wolf of Wall Street, and it looks super glamorous in that. And generally speaking, in the movies, all you see is beautiful suits, nice cars, nice dinners, etc. But is it actually like that? Well, I would say that pre-financial crisis in 2008, and I wasn't actually working in finance then because I was around 10 years old, but ultimately pre-financial crisis, it was probably a lot more like that than it is now. Most of the job is actually pretty boring, especially whilst you're an analyst and associate. Like, you'll be at your desk reading, writing, building models, building pitch decks, which isn't particularly glamorous. Now, you do get to go to client meetings and nice dinners in suits. I actually had one this week, which was a celebration dinner for a deal we did in the summer. But this is actually not the majority of the job and only really increases as you get to sort of VP level and above. Now, of course, some roles will do this a lot more. Anything that is sort of relationship led, and otherwise anything that is origination and you're a sort of director and above, where you have to bring in new business, you'll definitely be doing the sort of wining and dining more so. But in those early, I would say up to 6 years in investment banking as an analyst, associate, and maybe early VP, most of your job is not glamorous. It is just crunching numbers at the desk. And what I would say about client interaction is it's not always what it's made out to be. Sometimes it's a bit corporate-y and fake, and maybe once you get to a level where you own the relationship, you know the client personally, maybe it's a bit more natural. But in those early years when you're sort of tagging along, it's all very polished and corporate-y, and it's not necessarily that fun. Now, for the one you've probably been waiting for, is the pay really that good? Well, it depends which part of finance you're in, but let's look at it in the context of investment banking, and the answer is generally, yes, it is pretty good. You'll start out in the high 5 figures, which will spill into 6 figures pretty quickly, including bonuses, and thereafter, earning potential increases year on year until you're sort of hitting mid 6 figures and up to 7 figures for the MDs. Now, what I would say is a large share of this tends to be in the form of bonuses. And here, this is tied to the performance of the team plus the bank and can range between 20 to 100% towards the lower levels, i.e. analyst and associate, and thereafter it can be higher than this. But there are some considerations here, and the first one is there is no guarantee of this bonus. As I said, it is very much tied to performance, And if that performance isn't delivered in a given year, you may not get any bonus at all. And secondly, above a certain threshold, a percentage of your bonus will be held as stock, i.e., you will not receive it as cash up front, and it will usually vest over a 2 to 4 year period, which means a percentage of your bonus is not accessible unless you stay at the bank. This is essentially their way of keeping you invested for the long run. Then there's a small matter of tax. Now, this depends on which country you're in. So I'm in the UK, and here the tax is pretty bad. So generally speaking, I lose around 50% of my salary to tax every year, which is super painful for the amount of work that you do. And then remember that most finance roles are actually based in large cities, and large cities are expensive. So I live in London. Here, the cost of living is super high. So on a sort of location adjusted basis, the pay is maybe not as high as you would think. But despite the tax and the location adjustment, the pay in finance and investment banking in particular is still very good. And sometimes you lose sight of what it's like for most people in the economy. And so it's very important to be considerate of others, to support others where you can, and generally be appreciative of what you have. What I would say is most people won't get rich fast in finance. It's generally more of a long game where you save a percentage of your base plus your bonus, maybe invest that and compound it over a period of time. And it doesn't compare to entrepreneurship in terms of earning potential and the tax savings you can get via entrepreneurship. But generally speaking, it provides a solid, stable income that you can use as seed capital to explore other opportunities or to buy a house. So there you have it, my true story and perspective on what it's like to work in finance. If you like this and you want to learn more about finance careers, subscribe to the channel and watch the next video. Thanks for your time. See you there.